Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into an early college football preseason best bets video. And guys, we've got a big one. We're going with win totals. So yesterday I did a little bit of research. I looked at some of the win totals, some of the schedules, and these are just some of my, favorite over-under win totals for some of these teams. If you guys, really disagree with me on something, let me know, because I think it is interesting, if we blatantly disagree on something, I'm open to opinions from people. But guys, the first three teams I wanted to talk about is Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia. And they're over 10.5, they're basically all minus 200. And I think the over on all three of these is going to hit. Georgia's schedule is just ridiculously easy, being in that SEC East. Alabama losing 2 regular season games with Bryce Young and Will Anderson seems basically impossible. And then Ohio State, to me, that's the mortal lock. Ohio State losing 2 regular season games this season would be shocking. So that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. I probably wouldn't recommend betting on any of those teams just because you're not getting a lot of bang for your buck. The over on each of those teams is like minus 200, over 10.5, because it is very, it'd be very shocking if any of those 3 elite teams lost multiple games in the regular season. So Bama, Ohio State, and Georgia, I all think are going to be over 10 or 10.5 wins. So they're going to at least be 11-1 throughout the regular season. But guys, getting into my first team, it's actually going to be Oregon over 8.5 wins. And that might surprise some people initially until you look at how their schedule sets up. I understand they lost Mario Cristobal. I understand, Bo Nix, it's a transfer quarterback. How will he do? But the bottom line is this is an extremely talented defense led by 3 5-star defensive players. Again, Oregon's schedule, it's basically perfect. They're going to lose to Georgia. That's fine. You can lose to Georgia. Look at the way they're scheduled. BYU, you got to win that game. You got to win it. I think it's a home game for them. Eastern Washington is an easy one. At Washington State, very winnable. Versus Stanford, very winnable. At Arizona is a win. You get UCLA at home. At Cal is extremely easy. At Colorado is extremely easy. You get Washington at home. You get Utah at home. At Oregon State, and more importantly, you dodge USC. The key for Oregon and winning at least 9 games is that Week 3 non-conference matchup against a tough BYU team, but they are going to be at home. As long as they win that game, even if they lose Week 1, if they win that Week 3 game, I would be shocked if they didn't at least win 9 games due to the way their schedule set up. You don't have to face USC. You get Utah at home. You get UCLA at home. You get Washington at home. It's a very favorable schedule for them to possibly win 9 games and go over that 8.5 mark. The next team, it's Oklahoma State, and I do have Oklahoma State under 8 wins, so 7 or fewer is what I like from Oklahoma State. I think, there's going to be some regression with Jim Knowles, the great defensive coordinator, leaving. I would love to get this number at under 8.5 because I do think there's a scenario where they can win 8 games on the dot. But the Big 12 is underrated, and you look at their schedule, their non-conference, maybe they lose to Arizona State, but even if they start off 3-0, at Baylor is tough. Versus Texas Tech, they should win. At TCU is tough. At Texas is tough. At Kansas State is tough. At Kansas is an easy win. Versus Iowa State is not a gimme. At Oklahoma is probably a loss. And then versus West Virginia, that is probably a win. But I see maybe a 7-5 type record when you're talking about finding 5 losses. At Baylor could be a loss. At TCU could be a loss. Versus Texas could be a loss. At Kansas State. Versus Iowa State. At Oklahoma. And maybe that Week 2 game at home versus Arizona State, even though it is a home game and they are expected to beat Arizona State. That's not a gimme non-conference game. So that's why I like the under for Oklahoma State. I would love to get it at 8.5, but still 8 is fine. So the under for them. The next team, it's going to be Pittsburgh, 8.5. I have them under 8.5 wins. I'm really not buying Pittsburgh this year. The loss of Jordan Addison, I think it's an improved ACC conference as well. Looking at their overall schedule, they've got 2 tough non-conference home games. You would expect them to probably be the favorite in both of them, versus West Virginia and then versus Tennessee, but I think they split those 2 non-conference home games. That's already 1 loss. They're at Western Michigan in a road game? What a weird sketch. Western Michigan's logo is horrible. Good Lord. But that's a 7:30 Saturday game on ESPNU, and they're traveling to a MAC school. Who knows? But that'll be a win. Rhode Island's going to be a win. The FCS team versus Georgia Tech, probably a win. Versus Virginia Tech has probably been. But then, guys, at Louisville, Malik Cunningham, that's an underrated team. At North Carolina. North Carolina has recruited really good under Mac Brown. Versus Syracuse is probably a win. At Virginia, that's a loss. I love Virginia this year. Versus Duke is a win. And then at Miami, to me, is a guaranteed loss. I love Miami. So this team, they're getting the transfer quarterback Slovis from USC, but you're missing out on Jordan Addison. It's so unfortunate what happened there. I think their ceiling is 8-4 personally. So maybe it is 9 wins, but I don't think they're going to get there. 8.5, I have the under hitting for the Pittsburgh Panthers. Next, we do have Virginia, 7.5. I'm taking the over. I love the way Virginia's schedule lines up for them. Their non-conference is so easy. That's 3 straight wins. Richmond, at Illinois, versus Old Dominion, at Syracuse is a win. At Duke is a win. You get Louisville at home. At Georgia Tech is winnable. Versus Miami, that's probably a loss. Versus UNC, that's a toss-up. Versus Pitt, that's probably a win. Versus Coastal Carolina, late in the season. Wow. That's a primetime, late-season, non-conference matchup. I love seeing stuff like that. This team is guaranteed to go over 7.5. I know people have questions about their offensive line, but guys, as long as it's like a patchwork offensive line that gives Brennan Armstrong at least a little bit of time, they return their superstar receivers. Brennan Armstrong is an extremely underrated, potent quarterback. I'm expecting 40 touchdown passes from him this coming year. I know they've had some coaching changes, but I still love Virginia. Maybe even as a dark horse New Year's 6 type team. That would be interesting, but Virginia definitely going over the 7.5. And then we've got Washington at 8.5. I'm taking the under. I know this team has a, superstar 5-star quarterback who's going into his 2nd year. I think that's who they'll be starting. But this is a new head coach. 8.5 for me. That's just too much. To me, Washington seems like an 8-4, 7-5 football team. You've got 2 easy games, but then that's a tough Michigan State game at home. I think they lose to Michigan State at home personally. Versus Stanford's probably a win. At UCLA, to me, is a loss. I like UCLA a lot. At Arizona State is no gimme. Versus Arizona is a win. At Cal, probably a win. Versus Oregon State. Oregon State's not going to be bad next year. At Oregon, versus Colorado, and then at Washington State. Maybe they're able to go 8-4, but that's still under the 8.5. It just seemed like an aggressive number for a first-year head coach, and I understand they have a superstar quarterback who's going to be starting there probably, but still, I like the under overall for them. Next, we have LSU at 7.5. So with LSU, I just do not like the Brian Kelly fit. I'm going under the 7.5. They have a brutal schedule. Very interesting first game, neutral site game versus Florida State. Although, if I'm not mistaken, that's in the Mercedes-Benz Superdome, so it's basically a home game for LSU. Not exactly, but it's still nice. I would think they'd probably be the favorites in that, but it'll be a toss-up. Versus Southern, it looks like. That's a free win. Versus Mississippi State, that's a toss-up. New Mexico is a win. At Auburn, toss-up. Versus Tennessee, I think Tennessee could beat them. At Florida, to me, is a loss. Versus Ole Miss is probably a loss. Versus Alabama is a loss. At Arkansas is probably a loss. Versus UAB, that's a win. At A&M is a loss. So you're looking at a 6-6, maybe 7-5 team at best, but that's still under the 7.5 overall wins. I know they're a talented roster. I know they got a very good veteran transfer quarterback in Jane Daniels from Arizona State. but Brian Kelly, it just does not fit. It's going to be bad. Maybe they're able to go 7-5, but I would be shocked with this schedule if LSU rebounded to 8 wins. Personally, this is another one I absolutely love. We're talking about Maryland, above 5.5 wins, getting to a bowl, going at least 6-6. They've got such an easy schedule, an easy path to get to 6 wins. Buffalo's a win. At Charlotte? They travel to Charlotte? That's a win. You would think, unless Charlotte has some crazy home environment. Versus SMU is a win. At Michigan is a loss. Versus Michigan State is probably a loss. Versus Purdue is a win. At Iowa is a win. Versus Northwestern is a win. At Wisconsin's a loss. At Penn State's a loss. Versus Ohio State's a loss. Versus Rutgers. I got them at 7 wins. And their over-under is 5.5. Their over-under is 5. So to me, that's a clear value bet there. With them and with Maryland, they have 3 star receivers. They've got a young quarterback who's actually grown to his younger brother. He's got a lot of experience. They're going to have a really good offense. They're going to at least get to a bowl game this year. I'm confident Mike Loxley will at least do that. So I've got them over 5.5. Next, we have Miami at 8.5. I'm really high on Miami to at least win 9 games. With Mario Cristobal now at the helm, you've got the superstar quarterback Tyler Van Dyke. You've got a free win in week 1 and week 2. At Texas A&M, that's maybe a loss. It's a toss-up. Week 4 is a win. Week 5, North Carolina at home, that's probably a win. Virginia Tech is probably a win. Versus Duke is a win. At Virginia is probably a loss. Versus Florida State's a win. At Georgia Tech is probably a win. At Clemson is a loss. Versus Pittsburgh is a win. So this is a 9 or a 10 win football team to me. The schedule is manageable in the ACC. I really like them. The next one, I'm just quickly, Michigan. So Michigan, I don't think they're going to win 10 games, but I wouldn't bet it. It's just one of those things. They have an extremely easy non-conference schedule, and I would not bet them. But I did see that, and I was like, I think they go 9-3 personally. They're going to go 3-0 in the non-conference, but they're going to guaranteed lose to Ohio State, and then they have back-to-back home games versus Michigan State and versus Penn State. If they lose one of those 2 games, they split, they go 1-1, and you lose at Iowa. That's a 9-3 football team. I wouldn't bet it, but I thought it was interesting that they were at 9.5. And then another team, this was just something I just came across, Missouri at 5.5. I thought it was a little bit high, and it turns out I think I'm right. So I have Missouri under 5.5 wins. You look at their schedule overall, Louisiana Tech, they're probably going to win that game, but that could be one of those weird games where they get upset by a bad team, but they're probably going to win that. At Kansas State, the non-conference game, that's a loss to me. Abilene Christian is a win, but they've already got 1 loss. At Auburn, to me, is a loss. Versus Georgia is a loss. That's 3 losses. At Florida is a loss. Versus Vanderbilt's a win. At South Carolina is a loss with Spencer Rattler. Versus Kentucky is a loss. At Tennessee is a loss. Versus New Mexico is a win. Versus Arkansas is probably a loss. So that's 8. Yeah, no, I like the under, because the under 5.5. Yeah, they got me confused a little bit. No, I like their under. So guys, those are just some early preseason team totals, over-under wins that I liked personally when I looked it up. If you guys really disagree with me on something or just want to give your opinion, that's fine. I'm open to it. But especially, like, if you heard me say something and you're like, that's just straight up wrong, I mean, you can disagree. That's fine. I want to hear why people think it is wrong. But those are just the overall games that I saw yesterday when I wanted to do this video. I found some teams, their over-unders that I liked. But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description. I'm, of course, the Depressed Ginger. Thank you for watching.